Morning guys, such Scrappy again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. With all the drama around Cloud9 and other organizations in recent days, the question has turned to whether other organizations that have done a great thing for the scene in the last couple of years could well get into the Pro League. Push to the league has been talked about for some time, and now ZooMaa says there is genuine interest in getting the Stallions into the Pro League, into the CDL, with various parties he has been conversing with. How would this happen? How would it actually work in reality? Is it a realistic possibility, given there still are a couple of poverty orgs out there that need to be replaced? Robots and Twitter, your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I greatly appreciate it. Drazah back in it again. Had a great tournament. A Huke from the bench definitely put some pressure on, I think, Drazah and Abuzah to a certain extent to step up their game, even 04 to a certain extent. They had a great tournament, but Drazah is still playing challenge. You just cannot stop this guy. Let's talk about a few Lion Man cards. We have the cards for the top 12 finishes, starting here with JoeDeceives and the boys on Toronto Ultra, Toronto Koi, whatever. Difficult stage for ReeaL and Insight. Of course, ReeaL had a horrible major. JoeDeceives, though, I mean, what a crazy card. It's very, very rare to see a card in the high 90s that is actually a lower number than it should be based on the actual overall data here, because he has a negative record. So, you know, they get a minus number in the record count because they were negative. So his cards is only a 96. It would be at least a 98. I mean, you can see these numbers here. 99 of the SMG, so the best SMG in terms of damage per 10 in hardpoint, the best SMG in kills per round, first blood in search and destroy, also with a 1.2, the best SMG in kills per 10 in overloads, and very, very close indeed in the other categories as well. In fact, he had a 99 overall damage per round as well in search and destroy, but it's not even counted because that's the way the cards work. So yeah, just an unreal stint from Joe this stage, and still with him dropping these absurd numbers in search, it's only good enough for a 4-in-9 record, which in many respects was the key difference maker for this team. They had a reasonably competitive series against Gentlemates, the eventual champions, in the first round, but then they got knocked out by Heretics, which was an absolute disaster. So, look, they're making a role change. CleanX and ReeaL, we believe, are going to swap it around. Is that a good idea? I think it's worth a try, but people are going to be looking at Insight next, right, if that doesn't work. And also, of course, the ReeaL question, because his performance at the major was certainly not good enough. This was Boston. Look, the Snoopy, Nasty duo core has been solid. Nasty's Overload has been especially good. To be honest, their Overload in general has been their best mode. Purge and Cammy with a pretty challenging stage, again, in Search and Destroy. That was really the key for them, unfortunately. If they just didn't get reverse swept by Surge, they would have started in the winners bracket and we could have been having a very different conversation. Look, maybe in their roster discussions over the last few days, they are considering these factors. They could very well have been in winners. They played one match in the tournament. They lost to FaZe. They came top 3. They could have been in finals. So it's difficult to judge this Boston team too much. You know, their record isn't bad. It's just they weren't good enough when it really mattered. These were the Cloud9 cards. Absolutely brutal, to be perfectly honest. And look, I don't think these cards do a great job of reflecting just how good these players were, but look, at the end of the day, someone has to have bad cards, and it was always going to be Cloud9. So look, just based on like pace and the other factors, pretty much all of them were negative in every mode. It was only Beans in Search and Destroy who was actually positive in anything, which is just pretty bad. And yeah, I don't know. Vivid's still on the AR. I don't know if it's a great idea. Obviously not anymore because the team's dropped everyone. So that is the pretty disgusting Cloud9 cards. Raven's cards, much better, right? And again, you can say this is cheese, which to some degree it is, because most of this is based out of their online play, of course, whereas on LAN it was a very different story. But yeah, Exceed gets a crown back to an extent because he had an 85 card. But obviously on LAN, well, these were a very different story indeed. Now, the Falcons cards we'll probably talk about tomorrow in the coming days. They had an interesting tournament. They came top 8 in the end, but they were probably better than that. They lost to OpTic in the first round. They then dropped to losers, lost to FaZe in 5. Now, they, I think, arguably might be the 5th best team right now. Falcons difficult to say where Thieves are and all this right now, but, you know, I'd probably say behind Gentlemate, OpTic, FaZe, and G2, you've really got to put fourth after going Game 5 with everyone beating FaZe and being very competitive. You've probably got to, you know, I think Falcons could well be the 5th best team. Now, they put in a solid showing, but Kismet says he's not yet caught flow with the AR, and this raises interesting questions. Kismet isn't really an AR. Can he get used to it? Can he deliver performances with it at some point? Possibly yes, but he's not been as impactful as he might like on that role so far. So the question this really raises is do you just stick with it? Do you just say, okay, Kiz, not working yet precisely, but let's give it time, you'll figure it out, it'll work? Or do you say, okay, maybe we should put Kiz to the SMG, either we put Xnid back to the flex role, but I think they tried that, didn't they, at the World Cup last year, and they weren't very happy with Flexnid, so that's why they switched it up. Or do you say, well, if it doesn't work out in that case, we do something else, especially because there are other Saudi players. You know, QK was frying on the Falcons Academy team in challenges. There's talk about him getting loaned out to some other CDL team. Maybe if Kismet says, I'd prefer to run the sub, that's an option to have. You keep the Saudi thing, but you change which Saudi player it is. Something for Falcons to think about if things continue in that vein. Now, Falcons, they did scrim last night. They played the boys on Los Angeles. Thieves, here is Scrap joining the lobby. And as Clay says, damn, you're 1 minute, 9 seconds late. Someone tagged Benjay. So he certainly wasn't last to the lobby. But there was all this talk, wasn't there? Thieves being slightly late to scrims. To be fair, all the Falcons boys are here. Scrap's the only one that's joined so far. So anyway, it just is what it is. Scrap replies and says, honestly, I thought you were inviting me for ranked. We know the OpTic boys aren't going to scrim for a good few days to come anyway. Now, there's been lots of talk about Activision as of late, because the league, in many respects, is in the best place it's been probably since the inception of the CDL, to be honest. I know the first couple of years for the players were better because they were getting paid obscene money for no good reason. Nowadays, that's come back down to earth for the vast majority of teams. But in terms of financial viability, in terms of the state of challenges and the viewership on these matches and tournaments and the personalities and the content creators and the owners that are involved, I think the CDL is probably in, you know, the best spot that it's really been in. We broke the viewership record all time at last year's World Championship. We came within 500 viewers of it at this first tournament in Dallas. So it's the best that things have looked in many respects. Challenges has a load of interest for the Bush, for the Huntsman, for Stallions, for other teams. Of course, Omen have done great things down there for some time as well, and Falcons Academy, among other organizations too. But Activision have not helped in many respects. I think that's kind of what's frustrating about this, is that, yes, the league might be in a better spot than it has been, but does anyone like the online qualifiers? Everyone wants to do more lands. You know, the boys are saying here, we want to throw more lands. You know, Activision, get out of the way. Let us do our thing like we were doing before you franchised this damn league. And in addition to that, it's about the teams, right? The way the franchise league is structured. Yes, they've refunded the ownership costs, right? So the franchise fees have been refunded. So in that sense, it's not really a franchise league anymore. But there is still some sort of relationship where the teams, I don't know, they pay some sort of yearly fee. And if you are one of those teams, then of course you get preference. Unless you decide to sell, then nothing changes. The problem is that because of that almost like oligopoly in a way, other teams aren't able to get in, and therefore it incentivizes, as we discussed over the last few days, teams like Cloud9 to say, you know what, we'll just pay absolute poverty money because who's going to stop us, right? And that, I think, is an issue in a franchise environment. So the problem is we keep getting rid of these poverty orgs and we keep getting more back. It's actually kind of frustrating. You know, we got rid of the Paris Legion eventually. We got rid of the Los Angeles Grillers eventually. But now, New York Subliners, who were a big spender, they've now become Cloud9 and they're a poverty org. Surge, who used to be a big spender a few years ago, they're now a poverty org. Ravens have always been a poverty org. So, you know, unfortunately, we're still in a spot where we might want to expand the league, which I would still be in favour of, but can we really expand when we've got at least a handful of teams? You know, Boston, I wouldn't say they're total poverty, but they're not a million miles away. They're not spending what they used to, I would imagine. So, you know, there are some orgs out there that still, and, you know, Surge, Ravens, I'm sure. I know that Jack Etienne said I've had conversations about selling, but I'm not intending to. There are orgs out there that would part ways for the right number. And I think especially the way we think anyway, they're changing the microtransactions this year. In previous years, the microtransaction sales, if you buy the skins in the game, effectively got split between the teams. I think there was a percentage that went to the team that actually sold it. So I think OpTic will have made more than most. But a lot of teams will have made a chunk of money from OpTic's sales. We believe this year that's not the same story. So if you are a Ravens and nobody cares, you're probably going to not make any money. And that means, do you really have the incentive to stay? So that's when the question kind of becomes, all right, what about some of these teams in challenges? Could they come into the Pro League? Could they have conversations with investors, with some other organization? Could they partner with another more, you know, let's say an Envy or something? I don't know. Envy will not come in on their own, but you know what I'm saying? There's other orgs out there that are interested. Could there be some sort of relationship where these guys can form some sort of cohort and come into the league? Or could they just do it themselves? That could be the case for the Bush at some point. Conversations with the league may or may not be happening there. But also ZooMaa talks about the Stallions.
Live. But there's been some interest, bro. There's actually been some interest, and like, I don't know how to feel about it, because I'm like, bro, we could actually, like, if we want to go down that route, like, we might actually have the resources to do that. Like, we might actually be able to do that shit. Like, we would still need to, like, you know, iron out the wrinkles and shit like that. But, bro, can you imagine if the Stallions were in the CDL? Like, chat, if the Stallions were in the CDL, oh my God, bro. It would actually be a cinema. It would be a fucking movie, bro. You know, that's why I'm like, bro, like, I'm so down to try and make this happen. But then it, like, gets complicated because I'm on FaZe. And I don't know how that would happen with FaZe. Like, I don't know if I'd be allowed to stay on FaZe and also still do the Stallion stuff. Probably not. Like, I don't know how any of that stuff would work. Like, I literally have no idea how any of that would work. You know what I'm saying? But, like, you know, there might be some interest, chat. There might be some interest of maybe getting the Stallions in a CDL. I mean, I got to learn more about it to see how it would work and how we'd actually do it.
So hypothetically, what would this look like if the Stallions were to come in? I don't know how it would work for ZooMaa, of course, because if he's the owner of that team, I have a hard time believing he could stay on FaZe. You know, the Stallions was... the relationship with FaZe has always been very close-knit, right? We've had FaZe Black. Effectively, that was the Stallion. I think it was at the World Cup, wasn't it? They were FaZe Black, but they couldn't play as FaZe Black because that was the second FaZe team, so they had to play as the Stallions. But eventually, it was kind of the same thing. So, look, it would be mega for sure, and ZooMaa's clearly had conversations here, and he seems excited about the possibility. But again, it would change a lot, and also, which team would sell? What would that look like? Who would be, you know, bankrolling that kind of relationship? It's not going to be FaZe. They've already got a team, right? So, yeah, interesting conversations for sure. But it's kind of frustrating because, as I say, we were on the verge over the last year or so, maybe, of, like, let's say Surge stayed being a competitive force, and Cloud9, even last year, they still spent some money. They weren't a good team, but they still had at least a semi-respectable team. We were on the verge of like, okay, if Ravens sell, then we can actually expand the league and bring in brand new orgs. But now we're not back to square one exactly, but we're back to a spot where we're like, we get rid of some of these guys, bring in some other individuals, and then maybe we could talk about expansion in the next couple of years. So it is what it is, but intrigue your thoughts in the comment section below. Bush Gaming are ready for it as well if the conversation is to be had there, but intrigue your thoughts. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
One more on the ball.
No, don't start the shot.
Come right with me.
Secure the new device.
E-hop. Dead. Dead.
We picked up the EMP.
Yo.
Have your rails. Come here.
Kobe.
Nice nade.
Overload device success.